I thought this episode was fantastic. All the Rhaenyra stuff and the whole red sewing sequence was pretty much perfect to me. This is what I've been waiting for from Rhaenyra, and Emma Darcy played it deliciously. The look on Rhaenyra's face of being intoxicated with godlike power when she touched Vermithor gave me chills. They've been incredible this whole season, but this episode was on another level. There are questions of story logic in a couple places, especially in the King's Landing plot, and the final sequence was a bit bizarre logistically. Don't get me wrong, I loved it. This show finally gave the people what they have been begging for and showed us where Vhagar lives. This is something that I've been wondering about since season 1. What are the logistics of having a dragon that large that can't fit inside the city, especially during a war where you need to be able to get to it quickly? I am a bit sad thinking about Vhagar out there all alone most of the time. Does Aemond ever go to visit her to just chill? Or do maybe dragon keepers ever come to see her? I know she spends most of her time napping, but I would love her to have some company. A lesser show would have just cut to Vhagar already in the air, but they knew what I specifically wanted to see, and they did this for me. And I have called Aemond evil Legolas before, but I never expected to see him actually vaulting onto a horse. Amazing stuff. RIP to any unsuspecting travelers on that road. I looked at a map to try to figure out exactly where Vhagar would be, and my best guess is where the tourney grounds are, up here. This is logistically the best place to put her. We see this is a forested area, but this map is from the time of the main series, so maybe that land hadn't been cleared or cultivated at the time. The Iron Gate is the closest gate to the Red Keep, and you definitely wouldn't want her right on the coast because she'd be clearly visible and an easy target for any ship with a scorpion. There are hills in the background and you can't see the bay on the right-hand side, but that could make sense if the road is curving to the west. And I am probably thinking too much about where Vhagar lives, but it's important to me, okay? I am a bit confused as to what actually happened with Silverwing flying to King's Landing. I'm not trying to nitpick the show so much as trying to suss out what this means vis-a-vis dragon lore. My guess is that it was Silverwing taking Ulf to King's Landing and not the other way around. We know that riders don't always have control of their mounts, especially a brand new one with zero dragon training. This may be similar to what happened with Balerion and Arya. Arya Targaryen was a young girl who climbed onto Valerion's back as an act of rebellion. He then immediately took off, and neither were seen for over a year, and when they returned, it became clear that they had traveled to the ruins of Old Valyria, where Balerion was born. Arya died soon after she returned of some horrific parasite. Very gruesome stuff. Luckily, Silverwing was not hatched in Old Valyria. She was Queen Alysanne's cradle egg, so she was hatched in the Red Keep. Perhaps that's why she returned, like, hey, let's go visit your grandma's house. I miss her. It could also be Ulf wanting to go and show his new dragon off to his buddies, but he doesn't seem like that much of an idiot that he would intentionally fly to the city where they have scorpions everywhere and a much larger dragon nearby. And Rhaenyra would have known better, I hope, than to send a brand new dragon rider into enemy territory. Silverwing was almost hit by a scorpion bolt. This would not be a wise mission. And what would be the point? To prank Aemond and get him to come check out her sick new dragon collection? I feel like it would be better to keep the new dragons a secret for as long as possible and have the new riders get some training before going into battle. When Silverwing returns to Dragonstone, we see it is clearly the same day as the Sowing, as Rhaenyra is wearing the same dress and has soot on her face from all the peasants she burned. So this was almost certainly Ulf's first flight, and it's more than likely he couldn't control his mount. But if that was so, if I were Rhaenyra and the unknown man who just claimed one of my dragons immediately took off in the direction of King's Landing, I would for sure think that I had been betrayed. I wouldn't just calmly be awaiting his return to show off my new dragon army. I just wish they had clarified more what actually happened here and whether or not it was planned. This did seem a bit like Dragon Spectacle for the sake of Dragon Spectacle, and I love Dragon Spectacle. This was way better than last season's penultimate episode, Dragon Climax. But I think you could probably have just had Aemond get reliable intel that Rhaenyra has more dragons now. I guess the idea is that he's so arrogant he'd never believe it unless he saw it with his own eye, which is still very sharp despite all the book reading because he spotted those dragons from very far away. It was such a fun sequence. I always love seeing Mima, and that last shot was really cool. But in terms of dragon budget allocation, I would probably rather have seen more Sunfyre earlier on to establish his bond with Aegon, or maybe met Dreamfyre. Still hoping we're going to meet Dreamfyre. And besides the vitally important revelation of where vhagar lives, one narrative thing this did add is that we see Aemond is able to turn her around despite her resistance. She clearly wants to attack, but she does listen this time. But vhagar is the only one who actually likes Aemond. In this episode, we see how everyone in the palace hates him. It continues to be very funny to me how bad Aemond is at ruling and how quickly he alienated everyone around him. Maester Orwyle is now working with Larys to get Aegon back on his feet behind Aemond's back. In the last episode, we saw Aemond basically asking Orwyle to keep Aegon drugged and make sure he had a long recovery.
Seems my brother has a long recovery ahead of him, Grand Maester.
See that he is made to rest comfortably.
And this was after Orwyle walked in on Aemond torturing his brother. I think most people pretty much know that Aemond had something to do with his brother's burning, even if they can't say anything about it. And Aegon is making remarkable progress. In Fire and Blood, Aegon is said to be heavily drugged and practically comatose during this time. But Aegon is such a great character, and Tom Glencarney is such a great actor, it would be a shame to just take him off the board. Larys is once again using Aegon and putting him in serious pain, but he is also helping him. This may be excruciating, but Aegon does need to fight if he wants to survive. And Orwyle and Larys are not the only council members who are against Aemond. Jasper Wilde confides in Larys that he has heard rumors of Seasmoke being sighted with a rider, but they both agree to keep it to themselves. Likely this is because they think that Aemond will react poorly and punish them. This scene happens with Aemond sending Aegon's 2 surviving Kingsguard buddies to the wall in the background. It's treated like he's being merciful and letting them live, but they didn't actually do anything wrong. Yeah, they're bad at their jobs, but it was their friend who drew his sword and cut that guy's arm off, not them. It would have been very possible to just fire these guys, but this is beneficial for Aemond because he's getting 2 of Aegon's closest allies out of the city. And let us not forget that these 2 were also at the brothel when Aemond was humiliated. They weren't laughing. No one but Aegon was laughing. The rest of them just looked uncomfortable. But they are guilty by association to him, and this might be personal vengeance as well. I can see why Larys and Jasper might want to withhold the Seasmoke intel. It was shaky, but what really strained credibility in this episode was that no one on the Greens found out about Rhaenyra recruiting dragon seeds. It seemed like it was part of Rhaenyra's strategy that Olinda Massey be spotted and known. She is wearing a bright red cloak and her house sigil is clearly visible. I'm choosing to believe this is strategic and not just dumb. Olinda herself delivering the message convinces people that the request for dragon seeds is truly coming from Rhaenyra. We see this with Ulf's buddies. He dismisses the rumor, but on hearing that Rhaenyra's own handmaid was spotted in the city, he accepts that it's true.
Yeah, a likely story. You've been taken in, lads.
No. The Queen's own handmaid is here, spreading the word.
But this makes it even more unbelievable that the Greens didn't find out. Many of the Gold Cloaks are loyal to Daemon or Mysaria, but they can't all be. Does Larys truly have no spies on the streets of King's Landing? Maybe that could be a plot point, the High Lords underestimating the small folk and not thinking them worthy of keeping tabs on, but you would think after the riots they would pay them more heed. It's details like this that keep this from being a perfect episode for me. It just makes no sense that Larys wouldn't find out, and regardless of how much he hates Aemond, it is probably in his best interests that the city doesn't get attacked by dragons. I guess you could show Larys finding out, but deliberately deciding not to tell Aemond that could highlight his villainy, like he will let the city burn to achieve his ends. I just find these sort of plot holes so frustrating because they so easily could have been closed. This could be something that might have been smoothed out if it weren't for the writer's strike. I don't know. I don't have that much to say about Alicent in this episode. I'm guessing I will next episode based on the things I saw on Twitter from the leaks before I realized that there were leaks. Please clearly tag leaks if you're gonna post about them, people. It's really not cool. Alicent's arc this season has been about realizing that the things she dedicated her life to may be beyond her power to save. The system and many of the people she felt a duty to may be rotten to the core. I did love her little sojourn into the woods, especially as a parallel to Rhaenyra, who is embracing power and religious devotion as Alicent loses her faith and her power. Rhaenyra is surrounded by fire, Alicent by water. Alicent has been characterized differently from her book counterpart. I am actually working on something about book Alicent because I think she is very misunderstood in her own way, and people often take her presentation in Fire and Blood at face value. The two versions of the character are different, but they maybe aren't as different as people think. This episode gave us the return of the GOAT, and also, Oscar Tully is back. This actor was phenomenal. You can see the difference between the last time we saw him. He seems older now that he has assumed the burden of leadership. I love you, book accurate Robb Stark. This scene was back to some classic Game of Thrones politicking. This is fundamentally a show about power and what it means to rule. Oscar technically has power as Lord Paramount of the Riverlands, but that doesn't mean his vassals will listen to him. He has to prove his authority. And Daemon should have ultimate power over these people as their king consort with a large dragon. But Daemontargaryen is a blunt instrument, not a political animal, and he must deal with the consequences of his willingness to go from zero to war crimes at the drop of a hat. Daemon thinks of himself as inherently better than any of these people because he is a Targaryen with a dragon. He never gave any heed to what they wanted or needed, and now he has no choice but to eat crow and let himself be dog-walked by a 14-year-old, and I love to see it. But as much fun as it is to watch Oscar shit on Daemon, it is sinister that one of the first major acts this child has to take as liege lord is to sentence one of his vassals to death. In many ways, the outcome of this scene was predetermined. Oscar felt that he had to swear fealty to Rhaenyra because of the oaths of his grandfather, and he had to appease the Riverlords by sentencing Willem Blackwood, and Daemon had to carry out that sentence. Despite being the two most powerful people in this situation, neither Oscar or Daemon can actually do what they want. Something I really loved about this scene was how you can hear the God's Eye in the background. And the people discuss the old ways and make a blood sacrifice in front of a weirwood. Classic Harrenhal. I didn't love the final scene with Viserys. It was fine, just kind of heavy-handed, and I don't know that it was necessary. I think having Viserys back in this episode lessens the impact of last week's catharsis. And once again, I really don't like how this show treats Viserys as this great man. Hopefully at some point they will acknowledge how he is largely responsible for this war unfolding the way it did. So much blood is being shed on the mistakes of a broken man. Rhaenyra, Daemon, and Alicent all need to truly reckon with Viserys' legacy and the shit show he left behind. This episode finally went to a place I've been hoping they would go with Jace's character. I have been waiting for him to have some sort of a confrontation with Rhaenyra over his parentage for so long. Rhaenyra is seen as a good mother because she is kind and nurturing to her children, but their lives were in danger from the moment they were born because of who she chose as their father. There is so much potential for rich and compelling character work with Jace as he struggles with his identity that we just haven't seen. We did get the scene between him and Baela earlier in this season where he questioned if Harwin ever really loved him and his brothers, but they haven't explored Jace's daddy issues nearly enough. His use of the term mongrels here is tough, but it showcases the depth of his insecurity and his internalized self-hatred. Jace was never in a stable position as heir, and Rhaenyra and Viserys both had their heads in the sand about this. We see Rhaenyra persists in this naivete, reassuring Jace that he has nothing to worry about because he's her heir, but they are literally in a war right now because she is being challenged despite being her father's named heir. In the book, the recruitment of dragon seeds was initiated and facilitated by Jace, but the show has made it Rhaenyra's endeavor that Jace comes to oppose, and I think this is a very good change for both of their characters because of the issues raised by Jace in this episode. He was fine looking for highborns to ride dragons, but this basically destroys his claim to the throne. It is a widespread belief that only true-born Targaryen dragonlords can claim dragons, and if it is shown that bastards can claim them as well, then his dragon no longer proves his legitimacy. Jace, Luke, and Joff were given dragon eggs in their cradles as an attempt to demonstrate their legitimacy, and the fact that they hatched was seen as a sign that they were true Targaryen heirs. And Jace convinces his mother to let him and Luke fly out and recruit allies by saying, "Our uncles call us Strongs, but when the lords see us on Dragonback, they will know that for a lie. Only Targaryens ride dragons." What happens if Hugh decides he should be king? He looks the part of a Targaryen king far more than Jace does, and he rides a much larger dragon that belonged to the most beloved Targaryen king before him. This would present a serious threat to Jace. Dragons were what created the hierarchy between Targaryens and all of the other nobility, and now that illusion is broken. And both sides have helped erode this notion. The Greens paraded Maely's head through the streets, showing the people that dragons can be killed, that they are just meat in the end. It is interesting that that line came from Hugh. I do wonder if he will think differently now that he has bonded with a dragon. The Dragon Keepers voiced their objections to Rhaenyra's plan as well, saying that the dragon seeds are no dragon lords, that this is blasphemy. Theirs is a religious order, and they believe that the dragons are gods and that only true dragon lords can ride them. I loved all the Dragon Keepers quitting because it highlights how truly unprecedented and kind of bonkers what Rhaenyra is doing here is. She's playing with fire without a hose. She has basically formed her own religion here. What the Dragon Keepers call blasphemy, she calls ordained by the gods. I think Rhaenyra's arc this season has been great overall. She hasn't been given a lot to do, but that is the source material more than anything. In this part of the book, Rhaenyra is completely incapacitated by grief over Luke's death. She's already been given way more to do than her book counterpart. And Rhaenyra's story has all been leading to this. This is why I still think that the Sept scene in episode 3 was vital to Rhaenyra's arc. In that scene, Rhaenyra heard that her father mentioned the prophecy and reaffirmed her in his last moments. This convinced Rhaenyra not only of the rightfulness of her claim, but also the righteousness. Going back to the scene where she first tells Jace of the prophecy, she tells on herself.
I never told you, because I was unsure that I believed it myself. The horrors I have just loosed cannot be for a crown alone. That is why I must believe what Viserys told me when he named me his heir.
She now believes this prophecy because she has to justify what she's doing. Rhaenyra's conviction in the sanctity of her cause and willingness to feed a few dozen people to a dragon don't come out of left field. I think they maybe should have had her talking about the gods more a bit earlier. It felt a bit jarring that she had barely mentioned any religious beliefs before, but maybe that was intentional. She is just now finding her faith when it benefits her cause, or at least her idea of her cause. There is a question of what gods she's even referring to. I would guess she means the dragons or the Valyrian gods, though Adam is probably talking of the Seven when they first meet on the beach.
And if the gods call me to greater things, who am I to refuse them?
This seems to be what galvanizes Rhaenyra around the idea that the gods have ordained her cause. They sent her this dragon and his rider. I do think Rhaenyra views dragon riders as superior beings chosen by the gods. Just compare how differently Rhaenyra treats Rhaena from Baela. Rhaenyra at least subconsciously sees Rhaena as lesser because the dragons did not choose her, and Rhaena has been treated this way by her family her whole life. When we first meet her in episode 6 of the first season, she talks about how her father ignores her and favors Baela because Baela has a dragon. We also saw this with child Aemond, who felt so determined to get a dragon to prove his worth that he almost got himself killed. Dragonless Targaryens are seen as inherently less worthy. It is interesting to try and square Rhaenyra's beliefs with Viserys' words to her in the first episode.
The idea that we control the dragons is an illusion.
Viserys warned so steadfastly against using dragons.
They are a power man should never have trifled with. One that brought Valyria its doom. If we don't mind our own histories, it will do the same to us.
Rhaenyra's central justification for her claim is upholding Viserys' wishes, but this so clearly goes against everything he believed in. Perhaps Rhaenyra is able to rationalize this because she thinks the dragons are gods and the gods have ordained her. And how would you not think yourself godlike if you have the power of a dragon? The most radicalizing moment for Rhaenyra in this episode is when she touches Vermithor. She lets go of any part of her that felt unsure about this endeavor and embraces the will of dragons.
I've nothing more to tell you. It must be the dragon who speaks.
I wasn't sure how much of the Red Sowing we would actually see on this show, and I was not expecting it to be Jurassic Park meets Squid Game, but I was absolutely blown away. I think this was the perfect way to do this. We needed to see the brutality of what Rhaenyra was doing here, subjecting so many people to horrific fiery deaths to gain a couple of new super weapons for her war. I do wish there had been more people there that we had at least seen before. Like, what about that dancer from the brothel? The sowing of the seeds is not described like this in the book. It makes it sound as if individuals showed up on their own and made solo attempts to claim dragons. It sounded a lot more voluntary. No one was trapped in a room with a dragon and prevented from leaving. There is a question of whether Rhaenyra may have had a better shot at finding new dragon riders if she hadn't just thrown them all to the big angry dragon at once. She could have split them into groups and tried with a nicer dragon first. Maybe don't put all your blondes in the same dragon lair. There are TV reasons to make the sowing one big showstopper set piece, but I can also see Rhaenyra attempting this if she sees it as a test to see who is favored by the gods. The behind the scenes talked about this as a sort of mass blood sacrifice, and I like that with Rhaenyra's journey into religious fanaticism. Rhaenyra has become both Stannis and Melisandre. She has radicalized herself into believing she is the chosen one, and now she's burning her family members alive and also wearing an awesome red outfit. I love how Rhaenyra's dresses this season have become more robe-like, resembling religious garments more and more. This is actually the same dress she was wearing when she told Jace about the prophecy, but now she's added the red cape with the awesome shoulders. This seems like the start of a Mad Queen arc for Rhaenyra, except this time it will actually be good, hopefully. I really like it so far. I do think that Targaryen madness is a thing. These guys have done some wild shit, but I really hate the way that Game of Thrones took the concept of a hereditary coin flip literally, instead of exploring the reasons why Targaryens went mad. There could very well be a genetic component. Mental illness does often run in families, but it's never that simple. For the most part, Targaryen madness is created, not inherited. Take the Mad King himself. Aerys II, by all accounts, was normal in his youth, and only started to display symptoms of madness after most of his family got burnt up on the day his son was born. In that event, the tragedy at Summerhall could also be seen as an act of madness. Aegon V made a desperate attempt to bring back dragons with a ritual involving wildfire, and it went terribly wrong, killing himself and most of the people in attendance. But we know from the Dunk and Egg novellas that he started off as a sweet little boy. He did what he did out of a belief that it was what was necessary for the realm, what he needed to do to bring about the reforms he wished. After the dragons died, instances of Targaryen madness were often tied to a desire to regain the power of dragons, the power of fire. Rhaenyra is slowly being undone by grief and anger, and now she also believes she is chosen by the gods. She has the power of dragons and now a desire to wield it. Having access to that kind of power and a belief in your own supremacy can be intoxicating and corrupting. The other character I think we may be getting a sort of Targaryen madness arc from is Aemond. He doesn't believe himself to be the Messiah, at least not yet, but he has also embraced violence and believes he is the person who deserves to rule the Seven Kingdoms. I could very easily see his arc going down this path. Both Rhaenyra and Aemond have a markedly different reaction to the first time seeing someone killed by a dragon to a second instance of killing multiple people with a dragon. Their facial expressions in these relative scenes are very comparable. Rhaenyra was really like, okay, little bro, you think you're hot shit because you did 2 kinslayings? Check this shit out. You see, when I burn my family members with a dragon, they actually die. We got 2 new dragon rider pairings in this episode. The first was Hugh claiming Vermithor, the former mount of King Jaehaerys. Jaehaerys is historically a beloved Targaryen king. He was known as the Conciliator, and his reign was long and peaceful for the most part. Jaehaerys is the old king we saw in the very first scene of the very first episode. He called the Great Council of 101 AC to determine his succession. Viserys wore Jaehaerys' crown after he died, and Rhaenyra wears it now. We get a close-up of this crown in this episode, and the design speaks to conciliation. It combines gold and silver, and it features the sigils of the great houses. It's pretty funny that he put the Martells on there. Maybe he was manifesting, and it did not work. Rhaenys brought up this crown and Rhaenyra continuing Jaehaerys' legacy earlier in this season.
This council would do well to remember that their queen wears the crown of my grandsire, Jaehaerys the Conciliator, a prudent ruler, the wisest of Targaryen kings whose reign outlasted every other.
Jaehaerys and his wife and sister Alysanne used their dragons as deterrents, as a tacit reminder of their godlike power to destroy all those who opposed them. I believe at least Vermithor was in a couple of battles, but mostly Jaehaerys and Alysanne flew their dragons around for their royal processions, reminding the people of the power they held. Jaehaerys is remembered fondly by the histories, but I can say definitively that he is rotting in the 7 hells, if only for the way he behaved with his daughters, most notably here, his daughter Sarah, who is confirmed to be Hugh's mother in this episode. Sarah was seemingly a favorite of her father's in her youth, but when she was 17, she was caught having sex with multiple men, and her father's punishment was severe both to her and the men she was with. One of them, Jaehaerys slew in a trial by combat that he made Sarah watch. After that, Sarah was sent away to train as a novice in the faith, but she escaped and fled to the Free Cities and became a sex worker. Queen Alysanne begged her husband to forgive their daughter and let her return, but Jaehaerys steadfastly refused, saying that she was always a whore. In Fire and Blood, it is said that on his deathbed, Jaehaerys mistook a young Alicent Hightower for Sarah, believing that she had come back to him. And Jaehaerys would have been horrified by the Sowing. Jaehaerys and Alysanne strictly controlled which of their children got dragons. I don't think any of their children got eggs in their cradles. If they did, none of them hatched. Out of 13 children, only 3 ever claimed dragons. Aemon and Balon, who were the 2 eldest sons, and Alyssa, who was married to Balon. Before Sarah was sent to the monastery, she attempted to escape the city by sneaking into the dragon pit to claim a dragon, but she was caught, and Jaehaerys bemoaned the idea of Sarah having a dragon. Jaehaerys created the doctrine of Targaryen exceptionalism, claiming that because his family rode dragons, they were not subject to the same laws as regular men. He punished his daughter for her sexuality, and he hated her having bastard children. It is so rich on so many levels that Sarah's bastard son claimed her father's dragon. The disowned child's illegitimate son came back to claim the legacy of the grandfather who condemned them both to the lives they led. In his most recent blog post, George R. R. Martin writes of dragons, "They are individuals, they have personalities, and they often reflect the personalities of their riders, thanks to the bond they share." Jaehaerys may have presented a cool and calm exterior to the world, but his dragon was thought to be the most vicious alive. He became known as the Bronze Fury. I didn't really connect that much with Hugh before this episode. He seemed like a decent man, and I felt bad that his daughter died. And I do think when you have a character who is reserved and stoic most of the time, it can be harder to connect with them at first. But this episode absolutely convinced me, seeing the way his face changes when he touches Vermithor. It's the same way that Rhaenyra's did, intoxicated with power and a fiery glint in his eye. Rhaenyra says in this episode that connecting with the dragon changes you, and it seems like Hugh might mirror his grandsire in a cool exterior masking reservoirs of rage. I am fascinated to see where the show is going to take Hugh's character. He is definitely someone whose actions could easily have been misrepresented in the histories written by maesters, with the same bias against the lower classes demonstrated in this episode. Hugh's anger is currently directed at the Greens, but Rhaenyra played a part in his daughter's demise as much as Aegon or Aemond, arguably more. Rhaenyra's blockade starved the city, Aegon promised money but never paid, and Aemond ordered the gates closed so they could not escape. And now one of their grieving victims has a weapon of mass destruction. Ulf bonds with Silverwing in a very different manner from Hugh and Vermithor. I love that they made these bondings and these characters so different. It showcases the mystery of dragon bonding. Ulf is the opposite of how most people would envision a dragon lord. Someone on Twitter compared Ulf and Silverwing to Donkey and the dragon from Shrek, and now I can't unsee it. They are very much an odd couple, and Ulf is very different from Silverwing's previous writer, Queen Alysanne. Alysanne is as fondly remembered as her husband, who was also her brother. She became known as the Good Queen Alysanne, and she ruled alongside Jaehaerys. Though he was still the one with the ultimate authority, they were not equals. Still, many of the things people loved about Jaehaerys' reign can be traced to Alysanne and her influence. She was a skilled diplomat as well, and on her journey to the north, she became convinced that the crown needed to do more to support the Night's Watch. Perhaps she knew of Aegon's prophecy as well. Silverwing was the dragon who visited the wall and refused to fly past it. I love Silverwing. She is absolutely gorgeous and a new contender for my favorite dragon. Sorry, Mima. And I love Ulf. Putting himself in front of a dragon basically on a dare is hilarious. He would risk getting burnt alive and eaten rather than admit to his buddies that he was maybe lying about his parentage. I am really excited to see more of this pairing. We will probably never get official confirmation on Ulf's parentage, but I do find it very plausible that he is actually Baelon's son, and thus Daemon and Viserys' half-brother, and I am very curious to see how Daemon will react to that, especially if Ulf is older and would have been conceived while his mother was still alive. That would shatter all of his beliefs about his father. Alright, just a few miscellaneous shorter points. Once again, I think that Corlys's plotline has been underdeveloped. I can understand him wanting to keep Adam's parentage secret, though that is information that could have been useful to Rhaenyra. Like I said last week, I don't think it's a coincidence that Seasmoke sought out a close blood relation of his previous writer. And it is still wild that they haven't addressed that Corlys thinks that Rhaenyra may have killed Laenor. I really think she should have told Corlys and Rhaenys that Laenor was still alive at the end of last season. That would make this extra bittersweet for Corlys too, because he would have just been given hope that his son was still alive, only to discover that he has likely died as his dragon has taken on a new rider. It's hard to imagine that Corlys wouldn't be thinking about Laenor here, and I wish we could have understood more of what he was feeling. And on the dragon front, it's kind of weird how tiny Syrax is. The book describes her as huge and formidable, and here we have just a little princess. I know the real reason is probably just that dragons are expensive and they didn't want to have to make another dragon model, but she's like one of those teacup poodles that thinks it's a Great Dane. Syrax is the least scary dragon, and I kind of think that's a problem. It makes it even more misguided that Rhaenyra just gave these two giant dragons to unknowns. They could both easily challenge her and her little purse dog. Alright, that's it. I am really excited for the finale. I have really liked this season overall. I think it is messier and less consistent than the first season, but I think some of the highs are higher. I will be doing probably some sort of a full season review once the finale comes out, so stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for watching until the end. Like and subscribe, etc. Alright, bye!